Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. I'm comedian Shane Mauss, and joining me today is Garriy Shteynberg. Garriy, could you introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm Garriy Shteynberg. I'm an associate professor of social psychology at the University of Tennessee. And yeah, that's pretty much me.
All right. What's the main interest of yours? What's your research?
Right. So what I study, I call collective attention. So the reason why I say I call collective attention is because I actually pretty much made it up as the topic of my research. So I get the naming rights. So what collective attention is basically a belief that you're co-attending to something with someone else, right? Or many somebody else's at the same time. And we can get into the, exactly that involves and doesn't involve further, but that's sort of in a nutshell what it is.
All right. Well, yeah, explain a little more for me.
Yeah. Okay.
What is this collective attention? So because
right.
You're going to have to be real clear with if you're
right.
trying to come up with a new word, because look what happened to poor meme. This beautiful, elegant idea of a meme that now got turned into silly cat pictures on the internet.
Right.
So you better spell it out for people.
Right. Well, yeah. So attention is basically the sense that we are attending to something, right? And this occurs every day, many instances a day in our modern lives, both when you're physically present with co-attending others, but also when you're virtually with co-attending others. So you could be going through your world and you could see a bird on a branch, and you say to yourself, I see a bird on the branch, right? So that is not an instance of collective attention. Or you could be going about your day with a friend, an acquaintance, someone to whom you feel a minimal connection with, right? Someone with whom you could potentially have a collective agency with. What do I mean by collective agency? When you think of yourselves as a we versus an I and a you, right? Just like the title of your podcast, right? Here we are, right? So to the extent that you're able to do that, and you're looking at the same thing, you tell yourself, we are looking at the bird. And what we study are the consequences of that kind of belief, how you remember things about the world, your emotions about that thing, how well you learn, and enact behavior. And there's a whole reason of why this is important that I can go into, the theory of it. Yeah. But I'm just trying to describe the concept itself for now. But yeah.
So yeah, why don't you talk about why this is important?
Right. Okay. Well, so before I get to that, really quickly, I'll tell you this. In the lab, the way we study this, is we put people into situations where, in the key condition, right, where we want to sort of prime this sense of collective attention, what we do is we have a person believe that somebody who is minimally close to them is there. Right? They're a stranger, but perhaps they have some sort of a similarity in preference or motivation, just close enough to where a we can arise, right? And there's a second condition that's crucial, and that condition is that they're co-attending synchronously with the person. So it's not that a minimally close other is with you there, but they're also at the same exact time, presumably watching something with you. Now, this could be a physical other that you can see, right? And you can see that they're watching with you, or we can convince you that there's a virtual other, right? Through an avatar or something like that, right? Even now, you're in a sense, you're a physical/virtual other. I mean, I can't
very
be sure you're there.
Version.
Right. I can't be totally sure.
This is the technology that they put together, this avatar and everything. I'm actually a 90-year-old Japanese woman
Right.
But they were able to just through the free Zoom program, they were able to change my voice, my face, and everything. Pretty incredible.
Well, you're tricking my mind into so it's working. But so yeah, these two conditions, co-attending synchronously with a minimal other, a close other. Now you can, if you take away one of these things, then the magic is sort of dispelled. So you could have just a pure stranger, you can't really connect, or a similarly close other could be there, but you're slightly after them, right? Maybe like 10-15 seconds after the fact, and it doesn't have the same effect, right? So it's really the confluence of these two characteristics, closeness and synchronicity in co-attention, that you get that feeling we are attending to something, presumably. That's the idea, right? So why is this important? Well, first, let me tell you, what we find in the lab is that when you're synchronously co-attending, right, presumably in a state of collective attention, people have better memories for the content. People have more intense emotions for emotional stimuli, emotional objects. So like sad movies are sadder, happy movies are happier, and people tend to learn better, which corresponds to the memory, findings. People also tend to be more motivated. If you give them a goal and they think we are looking at this goal, they tend to perform better and persist more with goals. Now, so that's sort of the findings. That's the idea. And in terms of why this is important, it's kind of a rabbit hole a little bit. So let me ask you this. Have you heard, I know you've interviewed lots of scientists, so
yeah,
preparing for this, I was thinking, Shane might know more about, interdisciplinary science than I do, because I haven't interviewed hundreds of scientists. You have. All I know is social psychology.
If it makes you feel any better, it all falls immediately out of my brain minutes after the interviews.
I don't believe that. I listened to a few of your podcasts to prepare, and I was like, oh, I need to be prepared, right? This guy knows his stuff. So do you know? Have you come across a idea of common knowledge? And what I know, there's a layperson term, common knowledge, but there's also a technical term of common knowledge.
No, you should probably explain.
Okay, great, awesome. So this is far bigger than my research project, and it's a fascinating concept, common knowledge. And I'll tell you this: there are very few ideas that transcend disciplines, and common knowledge is one of these ideas. And it transcends disciplines intact. That is, the concept is tact across. So if you look at sociology, anthropology, philosophy, where a lot has been said about this, psychology, even computer science, right? Common knowledge, the idea of common knowledge is there, and it plays a really important role. Okay, so what is it? Common knowledge is the idea that you and I don't only have the same knowledge, right? So you and I don't only know that, there are 24 hours in the day, right? But we also know that we know it. Okay, so there's this meta level to common knowledge that's required,
right?
And that meta level is really important, right? So it's not just shared knowledge. It's not that we both know something. It's that we know something together. Okay, and so humans do this all the time. Create common knowledge, right? Conversation is linguistics is a discipline that has deeply explored this of common knowledge, and has many have argued within that discipline that it's necessary. Establishing common knowledge is the number one thing you do in a conversation, right? To the extent that I think you're going to understand what I'm saying, I have to have some idea of what we know now together.
Right.
And that we know it, right? Because otherwise you won't be able to decipher my words. So linguistically, we always check for common knowledge. Like when I said, hey, do you know what common knowledge is? Right? So I made sure to know that, and so on. So we do this linguistically all the time, make sure we're on the same page, and then we can proceed. Of course, when people teach and learn, this is really critical. But it's also really critical in economics, for example, right? In cooperation dilemmas, right? Does the other person I'm trying to cooperate with, do they know the trade-offs? And more importantly, do they know that I know the trade-offs, right? Because my strategic decision-making is against not only what I understand, but what they understand, and what they understand, I understand.
Right.
And okay, and so that's sort of, so to express what common knowledge is, this knowledge of knowledge is easy. But the reason why it's super interesting is because it's called the paradox of common knowledge. And here's why it's a paradox. It's a paradox because it seems to be necessary for everyday human functioning, but psychologically speaking, it seems impossible to achieve the way it's been set up. And so why is it impossible to achieve? So Lewis is a philosopher David Lewis, philosopher, 69, came up with this idea in his book Social Conventions. That's been sort of like the seminal idea that other disciplines have picked up on and elaborated upon. But it's been sort of come up with in different contexts, in different disciplines, and the same idea has been there. And that is that, okay, so I know I have a mind, right? And I know that Shane has a mind. Yeah, no, what? Most of the time, right?
It's very generous.
So that creates the potential for infinite mirror-in-mirror possibility. Why is that? Well, I know that Shane knows that it's raining, right? But do I know that Shane knows that I know it's raining? Maybe. It would be important. But you can go further. You can go to fourth, fifth, sixth. There's an infinite degree of recursion that can happen there, right? Steven Pinker from Harvard also talks about this quite eloquently if people want to look into it. So the problem is that the way the paradox of common knowledge works is that you need the infinite recursion to get to common knowledge, right? I need to go, I know that you know, and you know that I know, all the way down to get to the idea of common knowledge. But obviously we don't do that. Like nobody does that. Even getting to the third or fourth level is difficult for most people, and for anybody really. So then how do we do it? It's a kind of a, and there's a lot on YouTube. People want to familiarize themselves with the problem of common knowledge and why it's a paradox and why it's important. There's a lot of puzzles and sort of quirky dilemmas regarding this idea. Just like the double slit experiment in physics, quantum physics, YouTube is also rife with that kind of thing. Right. Common knowledge also is sort of a pervasive YouTube meme, if you will, that people can learn more about. Okay, let me give you an example. An example that really grabbed me when I first learned about the paradox of common knowledge, and that's the two general problem. So the problem goes like this. You have two generals, each with its respective army, right? And one general is on one hill, and the second general is on another hill, and in the valley is a monster, right? And each general knows if they march down with their army to face the monster in the valley, they will be surely defeated, 100% defeated, okay? Could expect, they also know that if they only march together at the same exact time, they will surely be victorious, okay? So the only thing they really need to do is somehow coordinate this joint expedition, right? So General 1 says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to send a messenger to General 2 on the other hill and let him know that, we're going to march at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. So he sends a messenger. Now, of course, sending a messenger through a valley in which a monster lives is a bit perilous. Let's just say there's like a small chance the messenger will not get there, right? Let's say a 5% chance, okay?
Right.
So General 2, so the messenger gets through, right? I mean, as you would expect, 95% chance, right? The messenger gets through. General 2 gets the message. Okay, we're going to march at 10 a.m. Does General 2 march? Well, right. You know, if you think through it, he doesn't, because he knows. Look, listen, I got the message, but I know that General 1 doesn't know that, right? Yeah. Because General 1's thinking there's a 5% chance he didn't get it, so I'm not sure he got the message. There's a 5% chance, and if I march on that 5% chance, there's a 5% chance I'll be killed because I'll march alone because General 2 didn't get the message. General 2, knowing this, is not going to march himself, right? Because now there's also a 5% chance he's going to be killed, right? When he marches alone. Now, okay, so General 2 sends a message back to General 1, and you think that would solve the problem. It does not do anything to solve the problem. Yeah, but and the crazy thing is, no matter how many messages, same thing occurs. Right. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's you're doing a lovely job of explaining it. Yeah, I understand perfectly. This is
okay.
Yeah. This is there's no monster in the valley of our communication right now. I get exactly where you're going with this.
Awesome. Awesome. So this is the paradox of common knowledge. It seems like we need to understand one another, and the recursion, mind-in-mind recursion, seems to make it impossible, because you can never get to a satisfactory conclusion there. It's infinite. Now, you could say, some people could say, well, this is what psychologists say. They say, well, do we really need to go all the way down to the bottom? That's impossible. Aren't you setting up a straw man here? You know, after a third or fourth communique, you know, people are fairly certain, right? My answer to that is, well, there's no principled way to stop. Like, why the second versus the third versus the fourth? Like, which level is this certainty level, right? And the other, you know, the other thing to think about here is, well, what if there was a simple way to establish common knowledge psychologically, right? Then you wouldn't have to do any of this recursion whatsoever. And this is where my research comes in, right? What about collective attention stops doubt in common knowledge?
Well, sorry, say that again. What amount of what? You cut out just a little bit.
Oh, sorry, but what about collective attention? The thing that I studied, right? What about the idea of collective attention, that we are attending to something, stops doubt from in common knowledge?
Well, this is like what I've been thinking about the whole time. This is the perplexing thing to me is that, and maybe we're not there yet, but the idea of the many assumptions that we seem to make in terms of we often assume, even if you're, say, physically looking at the same thing, like, say, presidential address or something like that during a pandemic, depending on what side of the fence you fall in and how much you like this given leader or whatever, you might make the assumption that everyone's seeing and perceiving this the exact same way that you are. I mean, hey, this person has eyes and ears and a brain. Why aren't they getting the same exact takeaway that I'm getting from this? And then also it goes the opposite way as well, where sometimes we assume that people don't have the knowledge that we have, like especially we like to like pat ourselves on the back and like this is like the whole world of like mansplaining, you know, that you hear about, like, well, let me explain to you, little lady, how the world works. And so there are definitely errors within this. And as someone, in case you can't tell by my virtual background, I've done a fair amount of psychedelics in my life, and there's an interesting experience within that, which is like a person can have, like, each individual person so you get together with a group of people, each individual person is very much having their own individual experience and what is important, what about the tree, what meaning they're deriving from this is very unique to the individual. But at the same time, there's something neurologically triggered that has this collective feel to it of like, oh wow, we're having this collective experience right now, this universal consciousness. But then you ask any one of those individuals to report on what that individual and they're not at all. So yeah, this is a really fascinating subject.
Yeah, I think so I listened a little bit about your interview with Joe Rogan. Is that his name? You're talking about psychedelics there. Yeah. And so no, totally. I see that, and I would say that is I mean, I haven't done psychedelics yet, but it sounds like it's a highly enhanced. To me, it sounds like a highly enhanced experience of everyday life.
Yeah.
Right. Because those two feelings to me seem like, well, that's what people feel as well, to a certain extent, just to a much lower degree.
Yeah, some people call psychedelics non-specific amplifiers, meaning they're usually just amplifying what's already kind of in there. Just
I see.
What's being amplified at any one given time is somewhat unpredictable.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. So my idea is, when we walk around the world, most of the time, we experience the world from a collective agent's perspective. And what I mean by that is that we literally think, right? When you see something in the world, we often think, not I am seeing it, you think to yourself, we are seeing it, right? So even though you're embodied individual, you have an individual brain, right? There's no psychic connection, there's no cord, there's no Ethernet cord going from my brain to your brain. Like, I'm not saying that, right? There's no actual collective consciousness. But psychologically speaking, I think we experience the world as if there is a collective perspective that we're constantly carrying with ourselves, that could be dampened or heightened. And I think the reason for that is because if we did not have this collective perspective instantiated, right, when appropriate, we wouldn't be able to communicate with as much efficiency and coordinate with as much efficiency as we do. Because what that collective perspective allows us to say to ourselves is, it's kind of tricky, because it's not what it allows us to do, it's what it prevents us from not doing. So what having a collective perspective on something, this sense that we are attending to our conversation right now, let's say, right? What it prevents us from doing is doubting that Sean understands what I mean when I say X. Right? It prevents us from common knowledge doubts. Right? That's really the idea. Right. And so it allows us to just keep talking, not having to constantly ascertain common knowledge is there. Now, of course, sometimes we get signals that we don't understand each other, and at that point the spell is broken, and I'm like, oh wait, okay, now we don't understand each other, collective attention is broken, I have to backtrack, fill in, or you have to backtrack, fill in, and get on the same page again. But if everything is functioning fine, we have this sense of this collective agent attention, right? We are attending. There's no room for you doubting or me doubting, because those persona are not in our mind. Only we are in our mind. So in effect, it's sort of this radical idea that I think is a radical idea, that conversation where you feel understood and understand others, has to involve a collective agent in your mind. You have to be thinking we as you're talking, as to prevent doubts about mind and mind recursion, right? And that paradox of common knowledge. But yeah, what you said about, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, something that just fascinates me is as you're talking about the recursion, and now you have my head thinking about the fractal-like nature of everything in the universe and complexity and everything else. I really like thinking about the kind of tipping point or the criteria between like, but what is that difference between when you don't have doubt and you do have doubt? like how is the brain doing that? I mean, first off, it's crazy that we have the ability to not have doubt in the first place, because this is, in my understanding, this is the other species that have anything like this have it much more limited.
This default theory of truth, that's a popular idea, right? Yeah, that at default we think everything is, you believe everything at default, and we only question if something seems awry, right? That's why we're so susceptible to internet scams and so on. Right.
Is there any kind of do you think about this from an evolutionary perspective of how some of these perceptions were able to adapt in the first place?
Well, right. I mean, so I don't take a hard line here whether this is an evolved capacity, collective attention, or a learned one. Simply because I don't have data, and there's no logical reason to say whether it's definitely learned or definitely evolved. That being said, I can give you an evolutionary story, of course, right? And the evolutionary story goes something like this. That's sort of the problem with evolutionary story. You can always give one. But the evolutionary story is something like this. We don't succeed as individuals, we succeed as groups, right? So to succeed as a group, you need highly efficient communication. Humans are really adept at collective action, right? Perhaps this is, I hate these jaded phrases, our fundamental, sort of ability as human beings and so on. Everybody says it and then puts in their own thing. So I don't want to be one of those people. But it does seem, if you look around the natural world, we're the only ones building skyscrapers and, jets and so on. Ants cooperate, bees cooperate, lots of species cooperate, of course, for their well-being. And apparently ants, I just learned this a couple of months back, ants can cooperate in like billions or trillions, something we can't achieve. But there's something different about our cooperation. It's highly flexible, right? It's sort of
There's a species of ants in like South America. There's like that starts spiraling and gets into like this death spiral. Like one of them goes the wrong direction, and then they all start turning a little too fast, and then they just turn into this swarming spiral of death that they can't get out of it. They'll just keep on spinning. No. Yeah, it'll just keep on spinning in a circle. So our cooperation is a lot more flexible in
I
that
hope
sense. So some would argue we're heading toward a cliff pretty quickly as humans, but seemingly we're seemingly at least able to tell ourselves a fanciful story about our flexibility. That's very impressive seeming.
Right. And these flexible conversations, it's hard for me. I'm sure other people can talk to this much more aptly than I can, but there's a certain amount, like you said, flexibility that you don't see in other species. Now, I'm a social psychologist, so what do I know? But that being said, how do you maintain this sort of flexibility? I mean, how do you maintain a conversation, which is sort of the essential coordination function we do as human beings, right? We've got to converse, we've got to understand each other to have a collective plan. We have to understand our respective roles in a sort of in the bigger structure, in the bigger scheme of things. And so what you need is that sort of flexible understanding, in spite of the fact that we can see that the world is constantly changing, right? What's coming out of my mouth is constantly changing. The world around us is constantly changing. Yet we have to be on the same page to understand one another. Mm-hmm. So how do we get on that same page, right? Collective attention, prioritizing what we know together now, right, is one sort of social cognitive mechanisms by which we would maintain that same page, despite the fact that the information is constantly fluid, right? It's not a static information. If information was static, we get on the same page and we'd stay there. No big deal, right? We don't need these cognitive mechanisms. But the problem is that the environment is constantly changing, both being changed by us as we're changing it and just talking about it, and changed externally. So that's the difficulty. How do we synchronize in the face of constant change? And collective attention is something that synchronizes group activity.
Yeah. I'm also curious. Sorry if this is a little bit of a tangent.
No, fine.
But I'm just having lots of new ideas bubbling up as I've been. Because this is the way in which this pandemic has changed our lens on everything. I'm one of the things that I'm thinking about with this in terms of different debates going on and everything else. But one thing that I notice a lot of people do to convince others, or what seems to be a successful debate or tactic or way of convincing people of anything, is to say, oh, well, we all know, and you can hear that and be like, well, I didn't know, but then oh yeah, I guess, like, just like that in the snap of a finger, it's like, oh yeah, I guess we all do know that, and then we even, and everyone, academics do this, everyone, philosopher does this, of politicians do this, of being like, well, Edward Finkelberg said this very neat sounding quote, and then everyone's like, ooh, well, this person Edward Finkelberg that I've never heard of until now said that. Well, I guess this is common knowledge. Then
exactly. I mean, that's what people are trying. They're trying to, right? Unknowingly, people are linguistically, paving the route to common knowledge in your head. They're like, we know this. Mm-hmm. Did you know that we know this? Right? It's effective. I noticed this in writing. People love to write in the third person plural, we, right? First person plural of we. And again, I wonder whether that has a more powerful psychological effect on people than saying, I know that, I have found this.
If this podcast was called Here I Am, and that's one, it would sound a lot more narcissistic. Here I am, everybody, listen to me.
Right.
But yeah, that's...
Somebody just got that idea. They'll probably go with it. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so it's there's this power of we, and the claim is that it's a real psychological heuristic that has real power because of these kind of conceptual logical reasons and the data also in my lab and others that kind of point to synchronous co-attention being a catalyst for learning. And by the way, we should talk about Zoom and why it's so uncomfortable and distracting as opposed to actual interaction and the fact that Zoom is excellent at bifurcating our worlds, Well,
but anyways, we should absolutely talk about that because I've had me Zooming for the first time in my life, as many of us are. I've had a lot of thoughts on the differences, pros and cons of regular communication. Just real quickly, maybe before we get into that, and then and we can start kind of looking at the lens of like what's actually happening now, and what your research, the maybe unique perspective you might have on the situation as you see it. Zoom being a good example of this. But I wanted to ask, why is there any research why Shane talking in the third person might be good or bad? How is that an odd thing? This like thing that must be a different thing altogether. Of like, that's almost like a way of just like standing out, a way that Shane likes to stand out. No, okay. But Shane's gonna start, and I think if Shane did start talking in the third person, it would be because Shane got the idea that maybe it makes him a more interesting person or something.
More peculiar, for sure.
More peculiar. I don't know about more.
I don't know. This is more of a clinical psychology realm.
Yeah. This might be a mental health issue.
Right. It's more like dissociation from the self, kind of objectification of self thing. Yeah. No.
So, all right, let's talk about Zoom, because let me throw one of the pros at you first, because I think you're going to be talking about some of the many issues that you and by the way, we're still in the thick of a lot of the learning and a lot of the frustrations and adapting to the new change. So it might be the case that we're noticing more negatives than actually exist. One thing that I've noticed just in terms of doing this podcast is that I've been having some of the better conversations, and maybe I'm just, when shit hits the fan, that's when I'm like at my funniest and sharpest and everything. And so maybe I'm a better host than usual, but I don't think that's it might very well be the case, but my perception is that my guests are the loosest I've ever seen them. I mean, I do all of mine mobily. Normally, I'd be in your home or your office right now if I was interviewing you. And I find that academics are very careful in what they say. They often, don't want to speculate on things and like kind of like go on the record saying this or that, or this is out of my field or whatnot. And then I'll hit stop on the podcast, and then we have the most fascinating conversation after the interview is over. Yeah. That's happened at least 100 times in the history of my podcast, where the most interesting conversation that I have is after we're done recording. And as I'm sure you can kind of understand and why that has to be in many ways. But there's just something about a nice apocalypse that makes people just not give a shit. And
there are bigger problems. Yeah.
There are just bigger problems than mincing your words and carefully making sure who you're citing and staying in your lane and this and that. And so I don't know if that's it. And maybe if you and I were in person, you would be just as loose or even more loose because of the pandemic that's going on. Or if there's something about the virtual conversation that allows for some sort of maybe you're not picking up on the cue. I can be a very socially awkward person, and I'm less socially awkward through Zoom. And so maybe you and I meet in person, and you pick up on how awkward I am as I'm setting up my equipment and trying to like keep a conversation going. Maybe that's making people so there's a zillion variables, but that's just one thing that's really sticked out to me so far.
I mean, you're thinking with all these variables, you're right. I mean, you're thinking like a scientist in that it's hard to isolate any which one. My sense is that it's really the pandemic, not the Zoom. The pandemic, it's a brave new world. in a way, it's liberating, right? Because you go every day through the world, every day through the same world. By the time you're 40 years old, you know the routine if you're lucky. And what I mean by lucky is you're in a stable job, in a stable country, stable part of the world. Everything seems pretty predictable to the point of sometimes boredom and complacency, right? But it also, you feel very regulated by all the social norms and patterns that you've learned in your 40 plus years. But then a pandemic happens, and all of a sudden, things are different, right? You can't talk to people, you can't go to grocery stores, no movie theaters, no place. Who would have thought that we're capable of changing a society like this?
Yeah.
So I also think our old habits of the way we talk to anyone become a little more relaxed. I don't.
Well, this is in speaking of the psychedelic experience.
Right.
I often explain it to someone that has never done that it's just a way of like it. This creates this new lens, and you see the world very, very differently. And people, it sounds like there's a lot of ego in there, and people are like,
right.
"Oh, so you're smarter? You figured it out?" Like,
right.
no, that's not. It's not that. It's not a more correct perspective necessarily. It's just a different one, and it's just a lot like traveling. It's a lot like going to a different
right.
country and taking in a new culture, and you're like, right. Oh, I didn't realize bathrooms could be like that. I'd never really
right.
thought about that before. And now
right.
all of the sudden, all of us,
right.
the trip is coming to the new world is coming to us. And
right.
so everyone's like, oh, geez, I'm rethinking how work goes. I'm rethinking,
right.
boy, I never found
right.
myself thinking about supply chains so much before.
Right.
Maybe I should get into gardening. How can
right.
I get a craft project that will also help me
right.
put a respirator on my and this is like, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter, you can have the most 9 to 5 mundane, cranking the widget out, repetitive right. life in the world, and all of a sudden, guess what? You're being blasted with a whole lot of new perspectives, right. which I think can also be really exciting. I think a lot of people, including myself, are having these collective like kind of manic episodes, because they're all
right.
having these, creating these new associations. These like shower thoughts are bubbling up, like 1,000 times more frequently than normal. And this is quite the experience.
I mean, what you said about travel is exactly right on. I mean, that paradigm for today is right on, because we did travel to another country, right?
Yeah.
We have traveled. And what's really weird is we kind of know it's the same country, right? So it's even more powerful, because we have to say it's the same country, but the different country. And it makes us re-examine, a fish in water never notices the water, right? But once you put it on land, it really starts appreciating its past environment. And we now start appreciating not only what has changed, but also, whether the routines and the structures of the past world were that necessary, right? Or not that necessary, but could they be rethought? Things that we took for granted as everyday things, our touchstones, could obviously be rearranged. So what else could be rearranged, right? Mm-hmm. So we have kind of traveled. We are having culture shock in a sense, right? Where social conventions are changing rapidly and messing with friendships as well. I should mention, like, we have friends that have different ideas about social thing, and having to navigate that is fraught with, oh man, it's just like bombs everywhere.
Yeah, there's this back and forth of the kind of human spirit right now. That's just like, we all need to work together, and then like, also everyone needs to fuck off.
right.
And so there's a lot of like, we all need to all get together and collectively fuck off all at the same time.
Well, yeah, I would say, it's collectively we need to get together, but interpersonally fuck off. You and I, not as close. We, however, are the closest.
That's an interesting.
The we is strong. The ephemeral, abstract we is strong. The interpersonal, like dyadic relationships are being strained.
With family life and everything else that people are having to deal with their quarantine. Yeah. I love that. I love that people people plan out their lives and they're like, there's just when people had their marriage vows, it's just like sickness and health, death do you part. People are like, I do. If they would have been like quarantined 24/7 for an unknown number of years, months, days, weeks, fuck no, I'm not. I'm not signing up for that. And same with just what people are having to do with the kids and everything. Just the people that you care about the most in life, those are going to be the relationships that are the most strained, and then the strangers that you'll never meet are the ones that you're kind of bonding with the most, or feeling the need to bond with.
Right, that's what we're missing. I mean, I have to say, it's hard to analyze things in the moment. I think we're not going to. It's going to be fast. Hopefully, when we come out of this, it's going to be a fascinating look back on how different it was and what it means and whatnot. But it's we didn't sign up for this. That's for sure.
The History Channel is going to be so interesting in like 100 years from now, because they're going to have all of our various hot takes and everything like recorded, and there's a lot of right now we have to, there's these world wars and stuff where we're like, okay, we found some letter and some general said this, so we're inferring this is probably what was in the minds of the troops at this time, and now everyone's taking selfies of their apocalypse experience.
Too much media. Too much media.
So
quickly about the negatives, just real quick about the negatives of Zoom and just any sort of virtual communication. And it really relates to what I was talking about, right? So when you and I sit in the room and talk, it might be more stilted because, for some reasons, probably because I'm wearing pants and now I'm not. I'm kidding. But edit that out. Actually,
I've been asking that question in a number of podcasts. I have a podcast about mating edition of this that I've been recording with 4 of us, and that's my opening question each time of like, all right. Who's wearing pants?
Right. But I shaved, so I feel like that was today, so I feel like that was a victory. But
I'm gonna totally let myself go. Just see what happens.
Well, the one thing that hasn't been mentioned is haircuts, right?
Yeah.
In 2 months, it's gonna be really interesting the way people start looking. But anyway, okay. So if we're sitting in the same room, we share the world, right? I have very little doubt that we are in the same room together, that we are attending to fairly the same physical space. But when we're Zooming, my world is necessarily bifurcated. We have our common world that you and I share right now, mostly through words, right? Almost exclusively through words, right? I see a little bit of you see a little bit of me. But I have this whole other world, as you do too, that I know you're not privy to, right? I can hear my kid, I can see my room, there are all sorts of stimuli, right? And I know that is not common knowledge. Mm-hmm. So I have to continuously suppress that as unimportant to our conversation. If I didn't suppress that, so I have to, if I didn't suppress that, it would interfere. And I can't really do it. I keep thinking, I'm in my bedroom right now. I keep thinking about my bed for some reason and how relaxing it looked. Completely inconsequential to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I have this virtual background. Behind me, there's actually cages filled with tigers. I got inspired recently. I started collecting tigers.
I heard there's a Netflix show. Yeah.
And so, and lo and behold, they're a bit more distracting than I thought they were.
Right.
They were going to be. So I threw up this virtual background.
But you see, if I was in the room with you, they wouldn't be as distracting for you because you would know I can see them as well.
Yeah.
It'd be common knowledge. It wouldn't be a big deal. We'd be able to talk about it, reference knowingly, laugh as we just did, But managing these two worlds is an essential cognitive weight that just it just puts a little friction. People can do it, right? And the best way to do it, I was thinking about this. Maybe this should go into your guidelines for future podcasts. Everybody has to turn off their lights. They have to be in darkness, no external stimuli, all attention on the screen. So they don't have these two competing, a unique world versus a common world with you.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Huh.
And I don't know how you feel about virtual reality, but it's a little, dizzying to me. But conceptually speaking, virtual reality kind of gets around that because it does block out the rest of the world. Versus Zoom that does not. But yeah, that's my take. That's my little contribution to the Zoom debate.
Yeah, that is it. So I have this web series called Quarantine Couple that I started shooting with this comedic actress, and she's a filmmaker, and we're in we have similar sensibilities and humor and interest in science, and so we've been like reframing this in a goofy world, and so but we're not we're in different cities, so we set it up that I'm like a Postmates delivery guy that got stuck in her house but quarantined, but in separate rooms. So anyhow, we've been recording all these things, and for example, we just did like a parody of, it's a parallel universe, so we just did a parody of the Tiger King, where we're discussing having watched the Hippo Queen together, and it's just an improvised thing that we're doing, and we're coming up with names of characters on the show. And I noticed that mostly what we were doing was coming up with names of like things that were around our individual rooms. Like a guy was like, Penny, because and stuff like that. So so that's just one small example, but you know what I'm saying? So like
that's a great experiment, actually. Yeah,
we're all being influenced by this different stimulus too, and then then
she's probably thinking like, why Penny? You're so creative, Sean. Where are you coming up with that?
Yeah.
Had she been in the same room, she would have known it's not. It's just on the wall or whatever.
Yeah.
Funny.
So I don't, because at first when you said that, I was like, well, how distracting can it possibly be? I like a certain, I like a certain level of distraction. Like much in the way that you have your best thoughts, like in the shower or when washing dishes or something like that, or when driving. It's almost like I can pay better attention to you if I have just the slightest amount of distraction outside of this.
So it's not just distraction. And by the way, what you're saying fits very well with arousal theory, where people have different levels of arousal that help them operate most efficiently, right? And yours is. And I'm the same way, actually. I do my best work from a coffee shop, a loud coffee shop. So there's a certain amount of arousal that is just optimal for the task. Now, the more difficult the task, the less arousal, right? So I can, I can listen to classical music if it's a fairly hard task. But if it's a really hard task, I can't listen to any music because. But anyways, that's sort of just remind me of that. So it's not merely distraction. It's not so much that this painting here is distracting me. It's why it's distracting me. It's distracting me because I know you are not privy to it, right? So it's because it's not social. It's because asocial. Had you been in this room, the same painting would not be distracting me, right? Because then I would assume you can see it too, and then it's a part of our joint world that is potentially relevant to everything we say and how we understand each other. Do you know what I mean? So it's not so much that there's just like a random stimulus here. It's that you can't see it, and that bothers me. That's sort of the thing.
So
at some yeah.
What is the difference between that and talking on the phone?
There isn't much, right? Yeah, it'd be very similar. Yeah, it'd be very similar. Talking on the phone, you know, yeah, any sort of non-virtual interaction would have the same. I'm just spitballing here. I haven't done any studies, nor will I a year apparently. So it's just an idea. But there's one little thing I wanted to mention about collective attention. The one thing that it's kind of a little big thing that we haven't talked about, and that is, I only talked about collective attention to the world, right? So we see the fact that the painting is there, and we see that the economy is going down the tubes, and so on, right? We see the world. But of course, also turn that collective attention lens not on the world, not on the physical substrate of the world as we see it, but also on what we conceive to be our ideas, right? So human beings have this ability. Who knows what other species can do? I'm not a primatologist, but I know human beings can reflect on ideas, right? Things that do not have physical foundations. And we make that distinction, right? We say to ourselves, hey, here's a bed, and here's my attitude towards that bed. And we know that our attitude is something that is not material. It's something that sort of exists within us in our thoughts, right? And we do the same thing with other people, right? We can reflect on thoughts, we can reflect on objects, and we treat those as separate things. So with collective attention, you can also have collective attention on joint thoughts, right? Sean and I are really enjoying ourselves right now, right? That's not really a material object, our enjoyment. It's a psychological state that we are collectively attending to, right? And the argument is that when we collectively attend to something like that, that is sort of the key ingredient to our bond, to our social bond. To the extent that I can reflect on the fact that we are attending to our, whatever it is, our grief, it doesn't matter what the target is, as long as it's a psychological joint state. We are attending to our grief, we're attending to our happiness. Laughter is a great bonding thing. Why? Stand-up comedy, you tell a joke, or even any lecture often begins with a joke. Why? Well, you have this moment of collective attention on joint glee, right? There's no more bonding of an event, right? In that moment, we are sure we are thinking the same thing, right? We are on the same page in terms of our mental state. So collective attention can also be used. Yeah.
That is, I never really thought about laughter as this like syncing tool, a way in which we sync up, or applause is the same kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Of just like, it's not even so much that it's funny, it's like this cue, like, hey, we're all on the same page right now, or like,
yes,
or like doing this is why we like doing the wave, like, wow, look what we're able to all coordinate.
Exactly. Yeah, so there are studies in psychology about synchronous movement, and if you can get people to synchronously clap, or in the lab, they feel closer to one another. And what my wrinkle adds to that is that the reason why that really works is that you have collective attention to that collective mental state in the moment. Because it's that collective attention that prevents doubts about our collective state, right? Am I the only one that knows that we're laughing, or do you also know that I know, and so on, right? You don't want to get into that recursive doubt. So collective attention to that collective mental state is important to really know that we're all experiencing it together. and yeah, so laughter is, and you're right. I mean, we could be collectively crying and presumably have the same bonding effect as collective laughter, right?
Collective yelling doesn't work as well, I feel like.
not at each other, but at somebody else.
Oh yeah, that's true. What about and we can wrap up soon here, but but what about something like kind of the idea of gaslighting or something, or where you know, I know I've experienced this many times in life, I'm sure many people have, where it's just like, am I crazy? Or is every other single person in the world crazy? Like, how am I seemingly seeing this differently than everyone else seems to be? So you seem you this feeling of being very outside the collective rather than assuming you're a part of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that would be disturbing, right? I mean, because I think the default state is that. You know, so people, this is what fascinates me about American culture. So before this, I was actually a cross-cultural psychologist that really was fascinated in cultural differences. And what it reminds me, your question reminds me of American culture. And in American culture, you know, we have this cult of individualism. And we kind of, we assume and notice, especially experience that seem very unique to us and individualistic, because that sort of reaffirms our individuality. Right, and uniqueness. But what we take for granted is that the vast majority of our feelings we deem to be collective. And the reason why you're so like, oh my God, am I the only one that seems, you know, when I was reading that mask advice, you know, 3 weeks ago, where they said don't wear masks, I was like, this seems like a total lie and insane, yet nobody's saying anything. I must be going crazy, right? That's sort of an experience. Of course, I didn't say anything either, because God knows, like, the power of the government would come down on me and tell, you know, and say that I'm an apostate. But I happened to notice it because it was an exception to the rule. Because most of the time, like, oh yeah, we're pretty much on the same page, you know, both in terms of the world we see and the feelings we all have, right? That's sort of the water we swim in. And once in a while, you have this experience of, wow, I might be the only one that has. And those are both exciting because they're new and slightly disturbing. And you hurry to talk to your friend to assure you that you're still living in a social reality and say, hey, I feel this way. You know, you bring it up with other individuals to get back to baseline in a sense, right? So anytime we actually feel true individuality, we rush to stamp it out in a sense by sharing it with others and like socializing it and make sure we're not insane, right?
So
insanity is
the last question that I have for you is are there any studies that you're doing in this moment, taking advantage of this new cultural, social, individual experience that we're all having?
You know, I decided, I think I read this somewhere and it really resonated, that this is going to be a marathon, right? So this is the marathon, and you don't start running a marathon by sprinting, making quick decisions at the beginning of the race. You kind of, you do what you do. You don't abandon your routines. You do your routines, and you reflect and see what happens. So that's what I'm pacing myself. So I haven't started anything new. I'm thinking about ideas I've already had, writing them up, things like that. I'm preparing for the long haul, and I'm afraid that I've noticed this with academics. Everybody I know in academia right now is starting a million projects, going crazy, and I wonder whether that's a coping strategy. I don't know if it's a good one in the long term, because you're going to get exhausted.
Yeah. I've adopted I've adopted a sprint and collapse kind of strategy toward all of this so far. But right. I mean it's tricky to tease apart for me what is inspiration and what is just right. coping or anxiety driven, because I find inspiration can be mostly healthy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But then there's also like I have to watch out for mania, which is
here's the way to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want mania. Yeah, it's never that's exhausting, right?
It's very inspired, but also leads to like lots of short temperament, a lot of grandiosity and everything else. So I need to watch for all of that.
Sure. In retrospect, it doesn't seem as good. Well, here's my way of telling. This is not expert advice. It's just what I do. If I work on that task, whatever that task is, let's just say we don't know that it's manic, anxiety, or inspiration. And then I take a break. Let's say a couple of hour break. Do I have peace in that break? If I have peace, if I feel satisfied to have peace, it probably was inspiration. That's kind of that's how I self-regulate. That's what I tell myself. And if I am anxious and itchy, then whatever I did back there did not fulfill a true need, and I'm still looking for something. I need to fill my time with something, right? It's like eating, whether it's calories or good ones, right? If you have a good meal, it's a healthy meal, you're going to be satiated for a while. Now you're going to get back to it like the next day, but you'll be satiated. So that signal of satiation is an important one for me. Like if I'm satiated, I'm really happy with what I did beforehand. I think it's important, but yeah, that's how I go about it.
That's fantastic advice. Yeah. I need all I can get on how to be productive but balanced. This is really fascinating work. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
And sharing.
Absolutely.
Shteynberg, right?
You got it. Perfect. Shteynberg.
Nice. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. One of the few.
Yeah. Hopefully we can meet in person sometime.
I will look forward to that day. Yeah.
Well, thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people, and we'll see you next episode.
Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre.